because I'm not involved in partisanship. You know, what's good for us in Quebec, we're in favor of it, and what's not good for us, we're not in favor of it. So I want to kind of do some awareness raising here. Now, remember the 70 meetings that we held on foreign and we were able to have an investigation, or a public inquiry rather, that was independent. And that the process started, and now, you know, it takes time, but now I understand that some people that, you know, who, you know, want to comment on everything that's coming at a very slow pace at the Hug Commission. But I have to say that we have to respect what we were able to come up with. And it's all parties. Now, do you remember in the summer, we adopted the process, and we did that together. So all the subjects that can come out of that, all the complementary or information, you know, if we are confident, you know, we have to respect the good judgment of the commission, and we have to let the process just play out. And I know that a number of us want to, you know, to deal with what doesn't really regard us, but I really do not agree that we kind of lead a parallel in investigation, and that's what's happening. We all want things to go faster, but, you know, anyway, so that's the context that I wanted to give. So now, with respect to the motion on harassment, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, you know, and I'm grateful that we took time to analyze this, and I asked a lot of questions. So I want answers. So this policy of harassment, and I think it comes up again every 5 years. We revisit it. And so the tabling of the motion to make this motion was tabled 2 years ago. So I understand that this policy or this regulation, you know, deals with our reality, and it'll be play a very positive role in our relationships as well. Now, that said, right now, I would like to, or right away, I would, before we adopt anything, I would like to have information, whether it's through via the analysis or the RCMP or the clerk, you know, what was proposed by my colleague. Is it the PROC's role to do an in-depth analysis of this? You know, the Office of the Internal Affairs does a lot of analysis, and no, I don't know if you've talked to your whips, but I have a lot of questions. Not with respect to the study, but with respect to the scope. Now, we've had 6 meetings, and we have to, you know, we have to look at what our shortcomings are so that we can adopt this, a policy rather, that I hope will help. You know, I think we're kind of going off the rails here. Now, we're adults, and when I have company and I have to debrief 28 students at the high school level, and you know what high school students can be like. They ask real questions, and I have to give real answers. Now, I don't know about you, but I was very ashamed. So if our work is about rebuilding trust and make sure that there are not shortcomings in democracy, I think we're caught and it's very embarrassing. So let's not forget that. So what I'm trying to say is that today, something's happening in the House, or things are happening in the House rather. We have to be constructive and effective. Now, I know a lot of people are not viewing us, but we do. We view ourselves. So call your citizens, and people are saying, "Well, what are you doing? We're being judged. We're being criticized." And when we have, people are asking us what we're doing with their money. So let's not forget them. So partisan strategies, I mean, they have a role to play. It's natural. But if the PROC does not act in a worthy way by respecting democracy and the issues that we're facing, well, we might as well just stop and come back next section. So with regard to the sub-amendment, Mr. Chair, I think before anything else, I need some clarification. What was done, or what has been done, what must be done, and what should we be doing here in the PROC committee to meet the objectives of the main motion by Romanado. And so I felt I'm glad to have gotten that off my chest. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank my colleague from the bloc. I'll be very brief. I'll just also mention while I have the microphone, Mr. Chair, that the previous chair managed to get us 025B on a regular basis. I hope that I'm just teasing. The room below us is the one that we normally have, and anyway. We'll see. I won't hold. You're 2 for 2 here, but we'll see about it afterwards. How you do on that front? But I'm just giving you a little bit of a jab there in good nature. So I would agree that with my Conservative colleagues, pretty much at the table here, that we need to pursue the foreign interference. I think we're about to find out that foreign interference. My understanding is that the House has made its decision, and question of privilege has been adopted. So I would imagine that we'll be discussing that in the context of these other 2 choices that are before us. We'll actually have 3 choices. So, and given 2 of those 3 choices will be foreign interference, and for a litany of other reasons that I think we should pursue the foreign interference, notwithstanding the timelines. Being my primary rationale, the timelines between now and the next federal election, should it be October 20th or October 27th of 2025, if we're going to actually make meaningful recommendations and have the opportunity for the government to respond to those recommendations with a legislative change and get through the legislative process, I feel that this would be something that would be of paramount importance and a priority for the committee. I'm not in any way suggesting that the original intention of the motion moved by Ms. Romanado is not important, but we're simply a matter of triaging what I believe to be the issues that are before us. And from my perspective, dealing with the issues of the sanctity of not only our electoral institutions, but the institution of Parliament itself, we need to pursue with this as a matter of priority. So I believe my colleague, Mr. Cooper, is next, Mr. Chair, so I'll cede the floor back to the chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Calkins. You are indeed correct. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would echo the comments of my colleague, Mr. Calkins, about the need for this committee to prioritize foreign interference, and that is underscored by the Speaker's ruling last evening, finding a prima facie question of privilege in respect of the failure of the government to inform 18 members of parliament that they were the target and subject of a cyber attack by the Beijing-based communist regime. And there have been moments ago developments in respect of that ruling with a motion having been moved in the House last evening following the Speaker's ruling to refer that prima facie question of privilege to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Moments ago, the House gave its unanimous consent that the motion be referred to this. They gave unanimous consent to that motion, referring the question, prima facie question of privilege, to this committee. And with that, I would like to, at this time, give notice of my intention to move the following motion, and I will read the motion into the record, and I would hope that there would be consent thereafter for members to adjourn debate on the sub-amendment that I had moved to Ms. Matheson's amendment in respect of Ms. Romanato's motion, because clearly, in light of the Speaker's ruling.
Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper. Yes, Ms. O'Connell.
Sorry, I just need clarity. The member can't give notice of motion and move a motion to adjourn debate at the same time. There's also no debate on a motion to adjourn debate. So could the member actually be clear on what he's trying to accomplish?
You are not incorrect, Ms. O'Connell. So just for clarity, Mr. Cooper, just want to understand for the benefit of the committee, you are not currently moving your motion. You are simply giving notice of introduction.
Precisely.
Correct?
Precisely.
Okay. Ms. O'Connell, does that?
Sorry, is he also adjourning debate? Because if so, there's no debate on that. That's
Yeah,
dilatory.
you're correct. So we, colleagues, we will not be able to enter into debate on the motion that Mr. Cooper intends to introduce. If he were to move that motion, it could not be debated until the current motion, Ms. Romanato's, is dealt with. And that would either have to be dealt with in the form of an adjournment or a vote. So I'm going to allow Mr. Cooper to continue with the introduction, but of course he knows very well, and you're not wrong, Ms. O'Connell, that we can't begin debate on that motion until we have dealt with these affairs.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper, back to you.
That is well understood, Mr. Chair. So I now will give notice to the committee of the following motion, and it reads as follows. That in relation to its order of reference of Thursday, May 9th, 2024, regarding the prima facie contempt concerning the People's Republic of China cyber attack against members of Parliament, the committee, A, for the purposes of the study, make use for the purposes of the study, 1, the evidence received during its study on foreign election interference, 2, the evidence received during its study of the prima facie contempt concerning the intimidation campaign orchestrated by Wei Zhao against the member for Wellington Halton Hills and other members, and 3, the evidence received by the Standing Committee on Access to Information Privacy and Ethics during its study on foreign interference, provided it shall not limit the witnesses who may appear before the committee or the questions which may be asked of them. B, deem the evidence, including testimony and documents received by and publicly available on the website of the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference in Federal Electoral Processes and Democratic Institutions, to have been received by this committee and may be used in its reports, provided that it shall not limit the witnesses who may appear before the committee, or the questions which may be asked of them, or the documents which may be requested or ordered to be produced by the committee. C, invite the following witnesses to appear. 1, the Honorable Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, by himself for 2 hours. 2, the Honorable Bill Blair, Minister of National Defense and former Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, by himself for 2 hours. 3, the Honorable Marco Mendicino, former Minister of Public Safety, by himself for 1 hour. 4, the Honorable Harjit Sajjan, former Minister of National Defense, by himself for 1 hour. 5, the Honorable Anita Anand, former Minister of National Defense, by herself for 1 hour. 6, panels of impacted Canadian members of Parliament of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China who wish to appear, provided that no more than 3 members shall appear on each panel for 1 hour per panel. 7, Eric Jantz, the Clerk of the House of Commons, by himself for 1 hour to discuss parliamentary privilege considerations. 8, Michelle Bedard, the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel of the House of Commons, by himself for 1 hour to discuss parliamentary privilege considerations and the production of documents. 9, officials of the House of Commons administration, by themselves for 2 hours to discuss IT and cybersecurity considerations, provided that 1 hour shall be in camera. 10, officials of the Communications Security Establishment, by themselves for 2 hours. 11, officials.
Mr. Cooper, just going to interrupt you. I apologize for 1 minute. Just because you're reading it unofficially here. On my copy, it says officials of the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. You said establishment. Can you just clarify which for us, please?
I'm reading
a different version.
Officials of the Communications Security Establishment, by themselves for 2 hours.
Okay, sorry. I was one ahead of you. Go ahead. Sorry.
11, officials of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, by themselves for 2 hours. 12, Natalie Drouin, Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, by herself for 1 hour. 13, Vincent Rigby, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, by himself for 1 hour. 14, David Morrison, former Acting National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, by himself for 1 hour. 15, Jody Thomas, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, by herself for 1 hour. 16, officials of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, by themselves for 1 hour. 17, officials of the Secretariat of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, by themselves for 1 hour. 18, academics, IT and cyber security experts, and other witnesses requested by the committee, provided that the party shall file their preliminary lists of witnesses within 10 days of the adoption of this motion. D, order the production of all memoranda, briefing notes, emails, recordings of conversations, and any other relevant documents, including any drafts which are in the possession of any government department or agency, including the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, the Critical Election Incident Protocol Panel, any minister's office, the Prime Minister's office, or the House of Commons administration containing information concerning cyber attacks and efforts to conduct cyber attacks against members of the House of Commons by Advanced Persistent Threat 31, APT 31, and related entities, provided 1, these documents be deposited without redaction with the law clerk and parliamentary council in both official languages within 1 month of the adoption of this order. 2, a copy of the document shall also be deposited with the law clerk and parliamentary council in both official languages within 1 month of the adoption of this order, with any proposed redaction of information which in the government's opinion could reasonably be expected to compromise the identities of employees or sources or intelligence collecting methods of Canadian or allied intelligence agencies. 3. The law clerk and parliamentary counsel shall promptly notify the committee whether he is satisfied that the documents were produced as ordered, and if not, the chair shall be instructed to present forthwith on behalf of the committee a report to the House outlining the material facts of the situation. 4. The law clerk and parliamentary counsel shall assess the redactions proposed by the government pursuant to subparagraph 2 to determine whether he agrees that the proposed redactions conform with the criteria set out in some subparagraph 2, and A, if he agrees, he shall provide the documents as redacted by the government pursuant to subparagraph 2 to the clerk of the committee, or B, if he disagrees with some or all of the proposed redactions, he shall provide a copy of the documents redacted in the manner he determines would conform with the criteria set out in subparagraph 2, together with a report indicating the number, extent, and nature of the government's proposed redactions which were disagreed with to the clerk of the committee. And 5, the clerk of the committee shall cause the documents provided by the law clerk and parliamentary counsel pursuant to subparagraph 4 to be distributed to the members of the committee forthwith upon receipt. And so that is the motion that I have now put on notice. And with that, I'd like to now adjourn debate on the motion on the table.
Okay, so colleagues, we have a motion to adjourn the motion put forward by Madame Rominato at the sub-amendment stage. If I understand the motion you're putting forward correctly, Mr. Cooper, just give me one moment to, on the entire piece to check with the clerk, okay? Yeah, so this is adjournment of debate on the entirety of the motion. This will go to a vote right away, colleagues.
Then I seek recognition after.
Okay. So, colleagues, I am going to ask the clerk in a moment to call the vote on the adjournment of this particular motion.
Sorry, point of order. There is a motion on the floor that there is no debate. It needs to be called.
Sorry, Ms. O'Connell, go ahead.
Sorry, there's a motion that
Yeah,
has been
yeah,
moved
you
and
are correct.
accepted. The vote must be called.
You are correct.
Mr. Lauzon.
I've asked him to. He's called it.
Mr. Lauzon.
Okay,
What are
colleagues.
we voting on?
We are voting on Mr. Cooper's motion, which calls to adjourn debate on Ms. Romanato's motion. This is non-debatable. We are voting immediately. I have asked the clerk to begin the roll call on that vote, and that is what he will do right away.
Mr. Lauzon.
No.
Madame Fortier.
No.
Mr. Duguid. Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes?
Mr. Culkins.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold. Oui. Madame Gaudreau.
Oui?
Ms. Matheson.
No.
Yeah, we have 5 yeas and 5 nays.
So, colleagues, traditionally, in this point in time, it is the chair will vote to uphold the status quo. So I will be casting my vote no. And of course, we will have a continuation of the debate on this motion. But Mr. Cooper has asked for the floor again. Mr. Calkins, is it a point of order?
No, I'm just asking to be put on the list.
Absolutely, no problem. So just for clarity, folks, Mr. Cooper, I'm going to respect his continuation because he had presented it. It was then Mr. Duncan, and I'm now seeing, then Mr. Calkins, and then Madame Matheson would be our speaking order. So Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours. A reminder, colleagues, we are still in debate on Ms. Romanato's motion. Yes, on the sub-amendment.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it is extremely disappointing to see once again the Liberals with their cover-up coalition ally, the NDP, blocking the work of this committee to get to the bottom of a matter that is about as serious as it gets and that must take priority, and that is the prima facie question of privilege involving 18 members of Parliament. Mr. Chair, 18 members of Parliament who for 2 years were kept in the dark that Beijing had launched a cyber attack against them, a progressive reconnaissance attack. There is only one reason why they found out. And they found out notwithstanding that for 2 years the government had that information. And that is because the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China had seen an unsealed indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice in March of this year. That prompted IPAC to ask questions of the Department of Justice as well as the FBI as to why members of Parliament, not only the Canadian members of Parliament, but parliamentarians around the world, members of Congress who were targeted as part of a cyber attack, were not informed. And the answer provided by the Secretariat of IPAC is with respect to parliamentarians outside of the United States that they had not directly been informed by the FBI or the Department of Justice due to jurisdictional issues. But the FBI indicated to the IPAC Secretariat that in 2022, early 2022, that information had been passed along to each of the governments of which those countries of which those members of Parliament were from. And so that included the government of Canada being informed by the FBI in the early part of 2022. And it was more specifically the Communication Security Establishment that had received that information, that 18 sitting members of Parliament had been targeted, all of whom were members of IPAC. And that prompted or resulted in IPAC then briefing certain of the Canadian members of Parliament that they had been the target of this cyber attack, and that the government of Canada had not informed them of that fact. And so it was subsequent to that there was a report in the Globe and Mail a few weeks ago. And so what we have is a situation where the government knew for 2 years that members of Parliament were the target of foreign interference by the Beijing-based communist regime, and those members unacceptably found out about it either through IPAC as a result of an unsealed indictment of the U.S. Department of Justice, or they read about it for the first time in the Globe and Mail. This is part of a pattern. We, on this committee, just completed a study on another question of privilege, a prima facie question of privilege, that was reported to this House almost exactly a year ago, involving the Member of Parliament, our colleague, Michael Chong, the member for Wellington Halton Hills. Just as these 18 members of Parliament were kept in the dark, that they were being targeted by the Beijing communist regime, that Michael Chong was kept in the dark, and just like these 18 members of Parliament, he was kept in the dark for 2 years. Just like these 18 members of Parliament, Mr. Chong did not find out by way of a briefing as a result of any transparency on the part of this government to alert him that he and his family were being threatened by none other than an accredited Beijing diplomat at Beijing's Toronto consulate, a diplomat that had been accredited and continued to be accredited by these liberals across the way, by their government. No, he found out about it by speaking with Stephen Chase or Robert Fife on the eve of a report that they wrote in the Globe and Mail. And what we have seen in this instance, just like in what happened to Michael Chong, was this Liberal government and this Prime Minister refusing to accept responsibility. They're the government, but somehow they're never responsible. They're never responsible for anything, according to them. They blame, they always talk about lessons learned.
Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper. Ms. O'Connor on a point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper is speaking to a motion that we are not on, and I would suggest that he get back to the topic of the motion at hand, which is about harassment.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper, just one moment. I'll address that. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Mr. Cooper, I think we went through this a little bit in the last meeting. I'm sure you're getting to things that are relevant to that. So I'll turn the floor back to you.
It is relevant to the motion because it's relevant to the issue of prioritization. And that is the heart of the sub-amendment that I had put forward to Ms. Matheson's amendment. And as I was saying, this government, in this instance, with respect to this failure to inform members of Parliament and that of what happened to Mr. Chong, the response from these Liberals is that they're not responsible, even though they are the government. It's always someone else's fault. In the case of Mr. Chong, it was asserted that it was CSIS's fault. In fact, the Prime Minister even went so far as to claim he had no idea until he saw it in the Globe and Mail. And then he said, well, when that turned out not to be the case, he said, well, CSIS, or rather, sorry, he said, let me rephrase that. When he first said he learned about it in the Globe and Mail, he doubled down on that, saying that CSIS had made a decision not to brief him on it because CSIS had deemed it not important enough to bring it up to the Prime Minister. That turned out to be false because it was then revealed that CSIS had provided that warning that MP Chong and his family were being targeted by the Beijing-based communist regime. 2, the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO, and of course we later learned that CSIS had sent an earlier IMU to the Minister of Public Safety, his Chief of Staff, and the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, the current Minister of National Defense, Bill Blair. And then the Prime Minister actually tried to blame Michael Chong himself, falsely claiming that Michael Chong had been briefed when Michael Chong had not been briefed. The briefings that Michael Chong had received from CSIS were of a general nature. So, as far as I know, there has never been an acknowledgement by the Prime Minister or by Bill Blair that there was a failure on their part in terms of intelligence, warnings from CSIS that are about as serious as they get, that ought to have taken priority. That was supported by the testimony of CSIS, the director of CSIS, David Binot, who said that when we send an IMU, we being CSIS, that is because it is a matter of high importance, and who an IMU is sent to, we send it because it's a matter that we want them to have on their desk. It's something they need to see. Well, and in the case of MP Chong being targeted and his family being targeted, I can see why CSIS
Monsieur le
would have
Président,
prioritized
point d'ordre,
that.
s'il vous plaît.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper, 1 minute. Oui,
Encore une
Madame
fois,
Fortier.
je pense qu'on dérive vraiment de la conversation du sous-amendement
I think
tellement...
we're really getting away from that point of order. I don't even remember what the sub-amendment was. If it would be possible for Mr. Cooper to please remind us what is the sub-amendment so that I can try to get an understanding, because I'm really a little bit, I find that we're really getting very far away from the subject of the sub-amendment, and I would like to return to the sub-amendment, Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Chair, notwithstanding the fact I just heard instructions given to Mr. Duguid from the Liberal Party whip to call points of order to try and move my colleague off of his game, I will say this. The issue that's before this is the work plan of the committee. This is committee business. We're basically talking about what this committee ought to be studying, whether we're in the amendment, or the main motion, the amendment, or the sub-amendment. And great latitude is always given for members of Parliament to discuss any of the priorities in the work plan that this committee would have. I think my colleague, Mr. Cooper, is completely in order to discuss not only within the context of his sub-amendment, but the broader overall agenda of the work plan of this committee. And frankly, I'm not going to fault anybody for using whatever strategies or tactics they want to use, as long as everything's following the rules, and you're doing an excellent job so far, Mr. Chair, in administering the rules, insofar as we're in our second meeting. But I would hope that colleagues would have enough respect for the general traditions and practices of this place within the context of the rules, that we can talk during committee business and the schedule and planning of this committee about any of the motions, generally speaking, that would be a priority as we try and triage our way forward and come to a solution as to what this committee will study next. And I think everything is fair game in that context, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Calkins. Mr. Cooper, if you're willing to oblige, I did hear, I think, Madame Fortier just asking if you could repeat what your sub-amendment was for the purposes of clarity on the part of the committee. If you're open to that, Mr. Cooper, perhaps it's helpful. It'll help us move along. And then, of course, you maintain the floor, and you can continue to talk on this as you wish.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And yes, for members who should have my sub-amendment before them, because it has been distributed through the clerk to all members, that it would amend Ms. Matheson's amendment to Ms. Romanato's motion in 2 ways. First, that it would prioritize this committee's study on foreign election interference before taking up the study proposed in Ms. Romanato's motion. And secondly, it would remove the requirement that the study proposed by Ms. Romanato be completed and reported back to the House by October 31st, 2024. It would remove that date. So that is what my sub-amendment provides for. And in speaking to the sub-amendment, to the broader issue of prioritization, which also has to be what happened last evening, what has happened in the House moments ago, have to be part of the discussion in order to appropriately deal with the motion before us, the sub-amendment, and more broadly, the motion put forward by Ms. Romanato from the standpoint of prioritization. And in that regard, I would note that in the case of MP Chong, there was a study of this committee, and we did find that Mr. Chong's privileges had been breached.
Just, Mr. Cooper, 1 minute. Colleagues, I'm trying to focus on what Mr. Cooper is saying, and that's difficult with conversation happening across the table. So I would ask that members simply meet in person as the speaker that has the floor is expressing themselves. It would be very helpful for both myself as the chair, the speaker, as well as the interpreters. If we can please have those conversations in person, away from the microphones, that would be helpful. Madame Fortier, Madame Gautreau, I'm trying to make this point that we don't do this, please. Okay? Thank you. Merci. Monsieur Cooper?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just as the Prime Minister and these Liberals refused to take responsibility of any kind for what this committee in its report determined was in fact a breach of the privileges of the member for Wellington Halton Hills, Mr. Chong, we see the same posture from this Liberal government in respect of the failure of this Liberal government to inform the 18 members of Parliament that the Speaker, of which the Speaker has now found a prima facie question of privilege in regards to that failure. The position taken by the Liberals since it came to light that these MPs were targeted is that this was something that was referred to the House of Commons administration, and therefore it was a failure of the House of Commons administration that these 18 members of Parliament were not informed. That is a completely unacceptable response. That does not excuse the Liberals at all from this failure. It is fine and well that House of Commons administration was informed about this progressive reconnaissance attack targeting these 18 MPs, but it's not up to House of Commons administration, it's not up to the IT department in the House of Commons to brief MPs that they are the target of a hostile foreign state. It is the responsibility of this Liberal government. And that didn't happen. And that is a significant failure, and it would never have happened but for the fact that there was an unsealed indictment of the Department of Justice and a report in the Globe and Mail. Otherwise, those members of Parliament would continue to be kept in the dark. And why is it important that they be informed? Well, I would submit that members of Parliament should be informed when they are the target of a hostile foreign state and when their own government has that information. members of Parliament need to know. It has or could have a serious impact on our ability, our colleagues' abilities to do our jobs. It could impact our safety, and not only our safety, but the safety of our families, our staff, our constituents, and others who we interact with, including human rights activists, members of diaspora communities who have been the subject of being targeted, intimidated, and threatened by hostile foreign states like the Beijing-based communist regime. Given the nature of the cyber attack, it was an attack that was a fairly low-level attack, but it was one that was designed to get key information about the 18 members, and it was progressive in nature. And so if members had been informed, they could have taken steps to work with the government, to work with the security and intelligence establishment, to take measures to protect themselves, their families, and so on. But that didn't happen. They had no idea. And the second excuse offered as to why they were not briefed, after blaming House of Commons administration, was that the attack was not successful. Well, with respect, Mr. Chair, that ought not to be the standard, that the attack was not successful. Again, all members ought to know whether they are being targeted by a hostile foreign state or any foreign state when our government has that information. It's good that the attack wasn't successful, but that doesn't in any way negate or limit the right of those members to have been made aware. And I would make the observation that if a member knew that they were the target of a cyber attack, one that wasn't ultimately successful by the Beijing-based communist regime, it certainly would cause me to, if I were one of those members, to take extra vigilance in recognizing that clearly I had a target on my back by the Beijing-based communist regime. I would want to know that. Because if they had targeted me once, it would be quite logical that they would target me again, and quite logical that they would target those members again. And that begs the question, if this is the approach that this government has taken, which is to keep members in the dark, blame everyone else when they get caught, not keeping members in the dark, and saying, well, if it's, by the way, it wasn't fully successful, so therefore we can wash our hands clean of any responsibility, it begs the question, how many other cyber attacks by hostile foreign states, such as the Beijing-based regime, such as the Iranian regime, have been targeted against members of Parliament, maybe members in this committee room?
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I think I alluded at the last meeting to the fact that I'm a big believer in health breaks, the necessity for people to stretch their legs. Of course, you don't lose your slot on the floor. I'm going to, should you or whomever else be speaking still in 5 minutes, may suspend just for 5 minutes to let people stretch their legs, and we will absolutely resume debate with whomever has the floor at that point. So I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Fine.
So at about 12 o'clock, I'll do a health break, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
How many how many members have been targeted, whether it be by way of a cyber attack or in other ways? We know that ever since President Xi took office in Beijing, that there has been a significant escalation in cyber attacks, in the targeting of diaspora communities, of interference activities, and in more broader terms, an aggressive posture taken towards Canada, the United States, and our allies. And so, in that context, it is also troubling that members were kept in the dark in light of the nature of the regime that we are dealing with here. A regime that has interfered in our elections, that has illegally set up police stations that violate our sovereignty and threaten the safety and security of Chinese Canadians, a regime that infiltrated Canada's highest security lab in Winnipeg, that resulted in the transfer of sensitive materials to Beijing-based institutions, including the transfer of two of the most deadly pathogens, Ebola and Hennepin, a regime that arbitrarily arrested two Canadians, the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, a regime that threatened the safety and security of 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong, and a regime that has imposed a series of punitive trade measures against Canada, not to mention a regime that is committing genocide against its own people, including Uyghur Muslims, and a regime that has, for more than 20 years, targeted Falun Dafa practitioners because they dare stand for the principles of compassion, tolerance, and forbearance. And I could go on, Mr. Chair, but I think it is important to highlight that to capture the significant threat posed by the Beijing regime, it is a regime that poses a threat to our democracy, to our sovereignty, and the safety and security of our people. And in the face of that, and with the government being fully aware of that, how is it that members of Parliament, 18 members of Parliament, were kept in the dark? How is it possible that the 18 members of Parliament were kept in the dark, notwithstanding the cabinet directive issued in May of 2023 that members of Parliament be informed? Why were they not, at the very least, informed following the issuance of that directive? And we know the Liberals issued that directive only after they got caught keeping Michael Chong in the dark for 2 years, that Michael Chong's family and that Michael Chong was being targeted by the Beijing regime, including an accredited diplomat, a diplomat that remained accredited for 2 years to intimidate Chinese Canadians when this government knew of his activities. It was damage control. And it raises the question about the directive, whether it's just a piece of paper. What good is a directive if it isn't followed, if it isn't implemented? It seems that the directive hasn't been implemented. And when we speak about prioritization, which is the heart of the sub-amendment, I find it astounding that the NDP would join the Liberals this morning after the House referred this question, prima facie question of privilege, to our committee, after the member for Vancouver East, who herself was targeted, gave an impassioned speech in the House an hour ago, that they would join the Liberals in blocking this committee from prioritizing and taking up that prima facie question of privilege. I spoke in the House last evening around 11 o'clock, and the member for Churchill asked me, she asked the member for Calgary Shepherd, Mr. Kimmich, who was himself one of the 18 members targeted, about would we just end the debate in the House so that we could get it over to PROC, so that PROC could get down to work, commence the study. Well, Mr. Chair, and I know you want to have a health break, but just, if I may, just conclude, and I will continue my remarks after the break, but when that happened this morning. The House voted unanimously to refer it to Procedure and House Affairs Committee. I attempted at the first opportunity, upon the motion being referred to this committee, to do what the NDP had asked last night, which was for this committee to prioritize and immediately take up the motion that had been put forward referred to this committee. And what did the NDP do? They voted against that. They joined the Liberals, who have every intention of covering up this massive failure that occurred under their watch. It's absolutely shameful, and it demonstrates that the NDP is all talk and no action, and at the end of the day, they are complicit in the cover-up efforts of this government. And it's just disgraceful. We're going to have to answer at the next election for that and any number of times that they have worked to collaborate with this government that is causing enormous damage to this country.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. I recognize you will maintain the floor. Colleagues, as mentioned 7 minutes ago now, and as reminded by my watch, it's time to stretch. So we're going to take a quick break for everybody's mental and physical health. We're going to suspend briefly. We'll come back in 5 minutes.